It will be, or is it under student material? So sorry, let me just find you the policies for it's under guidelines for responsible AI use. So this is on Learn under module information. That will have, I think, 4.1 labeling AI-generated content, disclosing AI-generated content. So if you just go through that, it gives you a reference example there. So you'll just need to reference that if you use AI. And then you can see the video, but you can't find the assignment instruction sheet anymore. So is that the question paper you're looking for? So if you go to let me just find out. It is definitely, I will try and link it, but if you go to student material, it is on your student hub under student material. Okay, so question 2.1 for the teaching approaches to literature. It's theme 4. Sorry, it is theme 4, the teaching approaches to literature. So that is genre, chronological, thematic, and authorial. So those are, you're going to choose one of those. So to look at question 3, I am remembering correctly, name and discuss the 4 major genres of hip-hop culture in the South African context. So that would be pretty much the 4 current ones. And once again, this is, you'll have to do a little bit of looking up. And although this is also something you could use AI for, please, anytime you use AI, double check it. So it doesn't give a specific time period, but we would be looking at sort of what are the main genres today, because part of the whole concept of hip hop is to use it to connect with the learner's current cultural interests. Yes, and that is something that you will probably discuss in your answers, is the fact that a lot of these hip hop songs do have a lot of swearing, and they do have a lot of really inappropriate language. So this is something that is a bit of a tricky one. And it's something that is worth engaging with and grappling with and adding into your discussion, because that is one of the big push and pulls with culturally relevant pedagogy, and hip hop pedagogy especially, is finding content that is relative, that is meaningful, that speaks to them, but is still appropriate for the classroom. So it is a challenge, and it is something that, as I say, we do need to grapple with as teachers. Any other questions? Yes, Matthew.
Hi, Amy. I was just wondering, this is maybe less like a question for this assignment, more just kind of for your own, from your own experience. I mean, when I was in high school and an English teacher tried to discuss kind of poetry in the context of hip hop, I don't know if it ever really worked. It always just seemed quite awkward. It kind of seemed like a kind of how do you do fellow kids situation. I mean, have you ever done that successfully? Did it work well? Did it actually like, I don't know. It seems to me like something that would just be quite awkward.
So that's a really, really valid point. And I have done it before. I don't think I've used hip hop specifically, but I have used pop songs and things like that. You do have to walk a fine line, because you can very easily tip into the trying way too hard, and it does come across as very cheesy. So you do have to acknowledge you are a different generation. You're not going to connect with it in the same way, but it is, just trying to think, it can work very successfully if, as long as you approach it sort of as, I'm bringing in something that's a little bit new to me. It's something that I found very interesting. It's something that I want to use. I'm going to use something that you might connect with more than I do to teach you something that I connect with. So the main thing is sort of that attitude of, not I'm trying to be one of you, but I'm trying to bring in something a bit different. I find that works quite well. Um, I'm going to be showing my age now, but when one of my most successful uses of culturally relevant pedagogy was when I introduced the poem to his queen mistress. I would play them that song, Give Me Everything Tonight. And we did team teaching, so I taught 4 classes at a time, and I'd play that song, and first of all, I'd hand out the poem, tell them all to read it while I set everything up, knowing they'll take one look at this long, antiquated poem and give up and say it's boring, ask them what they think, they'll like, play them the song, Give Me Everything Tonight, and I go, okay, let's start here. I go, what does this song mean? And depending on the group, some kids would scream out, it's about sex. I'm like, yep, exactly. Some groups would be like, he wants her to give him everything. So, you know, and you just don't be embarrassed about anything. You say, okay, what does everything mean? Come on, you can say it. And you go, okay, cool. So that song, You guys all heard it, you understand it, very easy to understand. Attitudes, very straightforward. So that song is exactly what this poem is about. And that then really helped them to connect with the thing, because they're all giggling, they're all going, oh, I can't believe that this is what we're talking about. It was an all-girls school, so that does help a lot. But I find it can work. You just have to sort of maintain that attitude of, I'm not trying to be cool for the sake of being cool. I just want to bring in something that you're maybe more likely to connect with.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks,
Yeah,
Amy.
no problem. Um, Hip hop pedagogy refers more to being in touch with youth culture than music genres and mainstream entertainment. So one example from this understanding would be the current 6-7 inside joke. Yes. So in your assignment, we are looking very specifically at using literal hip hop, which is how the term hip hop pedagogy came about, was using hip hop songs and hip hop concepts. And we have actually extended that idea, and we've moved towards bringing in youth culture. So yes, the 6-7 meme. Once again, you want to be very careful about how you bring that in, because it's easy to sort of slip into the trying too hard there. If you can slip it in somehow, that's always a fun thing. You can even bring it into a discussion. So if you want to do teaching, do talking skills, you could have a group debate or a group discussion on, why did that take off? What does it mean? And you can have a fantastic debate, because some will swear that the origins of this were whatever, and others will say, no, it genuinely means nothing. And you can get them to go and look up, where does it come from? And, there's so much you can actually do with that. So absolutely, you are correct, is hip hop pedagogy in general is using any youth culture. Yes, exactly. Taming of the Shrew and 10 Things I Hate About You. And what works so, so well is, as soon as the learners have something to hang their hat on as such, they connect with the original text so much more and so much more easily. So if you're doing Shakespeare, one of my favorite things with Shakespeare is to try and find a situation that modern teenagers would find themselves in, and ask them, what would you do in this situation? How do you handle it? What do you think would be the right way to deal with it? So for Othello, you've got Iago, convincing Othello that his wife's cheating. You can sort of bring up the idea of, you know, if you know that your friend's boyfriend or girlfriend is cheating on them, what do you do? And you can have a class debate. The side says, yes, it's okay to ignore it. It's not your relationship. Okay, you must tell them. And then, should you automatically trust someone if they tell you that your boyfriend, girlfriend is cheating on you? And you bring that in, and it makes it so much easier for them to connect with this idea of Othello, that, he's trusting his friend. Well, when we're reading Othello, we're like, well, you're an idiot. Why on earth would you trust this guy over your wife? Bring it back to how many of them said, well, no, of course you trust your friend. So anything that they can sort of connect with, any modern example really does make it so much more real to them. Okay. Any other questions or any other comments or anything that you guys have found have worked really well for you, or questions about how this would work in a classroom? Okay, all good for now. Okay, so I just want to take you through some of the more important or highlight some aspects for learner preference. So with things like learner preference, what you really want to be looking at is this idea that everyone learns in a slightly different way, but it's not static. So, for example, I'm a kinesthetic learner. ADHD kinesthetic learner, you can imagine how much fun school was for me back in the day where there wasn't such a thing as ADHD. So I always say I'm a fantastic example. Learners can learn in any way. Back when I was at school, chalk and talk. You read, you listened, and you wrote. That was it. There wasn't this. There weren't really visual stimulus. There wasn't a huge amount of kinesthetic learning going on, like none at all. And yet I learned. I did absolutely fine, got through school. I would have enjoyed school a lot more if there had been more kinesthetic learning, but I could do it without. So when you are trying to bring learner preference into your classroom, you want to be very, very practical about it. Like just about all diversity, you cannot accommodate all learner preferences in every lesson. It is going to be an absolute mess, and it's going to be so counterproductive. But if you can bring in more than one mode, we discussed this last time, the more ways that your learners engage with something, the more likely they are to connect to it. So some of the things you really want to remember is what is my content? So that is the biggest thing. You start with what you've got to teach. So what are the learning outcomes? What do I have to teach? Then you go, what is practical for me to do? Can I add some visuals? Do my visuals actually add to the content? This is a little bit do as I say, not as I do with my slideshows. I spend a lot of time on them. I love them. Not 100% sure that my pictures actually add all that much value to the picture connecting to the words, but I just figure they look a little bit more pretty, and if something looks more attractive, it's easier to read. But what you really want to focus on is trying to find a visual that really does enhance the text. So when you are using different teaching strategies, you also want to, as we say, make it relevant or make it meaningful to them. So that's going to get into our sociocultural theory. And then how can I connect the content with real life? So what you want to do is you want to bring in a couple of extra learning, a couple of different learner preferences. So can you get them to read the extract, and can you maybe play an audio of a professional reading the extract and then they read along with it? So that is using two different modes. You are accommodating those learners who prefer reading, you're accommodating those learners who prefer listening. The kinesthetic and the visual learners, they'll be absolutely fine. But you will have been able to connect a little bit more with some more learners. And the other thing I just want to point out is that even though a learner might be a predominantly visual learner, there are going to be plenty of times where they will learn best by reading instead of viewing, because the content just does not fit a visual. So if you were to try and put it into a visual format, it wouldn't make sense to them anyway. So practicality has to come first, and then differentiation afterwards. Okay, so are there any questions about learner preference, very closely tied to multimodality and diversity? All good? Okay, fantastic. So the sociocultural learning theory. So essentially, learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a social process. So everything around us, our culture, our social interactions, all of that have an enormous impact on our learning. So essentially, we don't have education in a vacuum. Now, we learn through and with the help of others. Now, this is much broader than, well, okay, that's fantastic. I know some people learn best in a classroom, but honestly, distance learning, not going in, not seeing anyone, just reading the material by myself is my best. That is more of a minority viewpoint, not discounting it. However, if you are never socialized to value learning, if your whole life structure is arranged to discourage education, then education is not going to be easy for you, as opposed to a culture that values education, a social structure that values education, a family structure that values education, encouragement from a teacher, a mentor, a group of students. All of that will create an environment where learning happens. So we don't ever just look at what is happening in the classroom. So this is a very, very multifaceted theory. So many things are going to come into this. And one of the practicalities for us is when we are approaching education, we have to understand it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So that student who comes into class, maybe they have ADHD, maybe they have autism, maybe they are falling asleep at their desk because they are bored and they are lazy. Maybe they're falling asleep at their desk because they stayed up really late playing video games and the family, whoever is in charge of them, didn't say to them, hey, you're not allowed to stay up till 3 o'clock. you have to go to bed at a reasonable hour. So they don't have that support system at home. Maybe they just stayed up late because they didn't feel like going to bed, and they actually should have just gone to bed earlier. So when you see a behavior in a classroom, you do have to be aware that that behavior is influenced and informed and springs from a multitude of different things that are happening outside of the classroom. Not to say that your students are allowed to get away with anything. They're not allowed to fall asleep in class, sorry. That's just life. But understanding and seeing, okay, is this a child who actually just isn't interested and puts their head down at the drop of a hat because they genuinely just don't care about school? Is this a student who normally tries hard and recently has been struggling more? What's going on behind the scenes? Is this a student who is always just tired? What's going on? So when we see a student misbehaving or acting out or not approaching their work with any interest, the way we approach the student should be with the concept that there are other factors other than just school that is influencing what is going on in school. As I said, it's not a magical formula. There isn't something that I can say, this will work. And the reality is, if you are in a government school, your classes are going to be large. There might not be the support available to give each child that individual help and attention. But if we are aware of these things, then we are at least even just slightly better able to help where we can. And just as a side note, especially if you are teaching in a government school or you're going to be going into a government school, I know that there is not the same sort of support and training as some private schools have when it comes to training teachers and supporting teachers to deal with different and diverse needs in the classroom. However, please be aware that there are resources out there. So there are things that you can do to deal with dyslexia, to deal with students who are just not finishing their work on time. There's might be a reason for that. Might be that the child just works slowly. It might be there's a bit of ADHD there. It might be that there's a bit of OCD there. It might be a whole lot of other things. And there are certain things that we can implement in class to help. Things like sensory, you know, I don't want to say sensory toys, but sensory tools, different colored paper helps with a lot of visual problems and processing problems. So just as an encouragement to teachers is, I know there's so much on your plates already for me to say, no, go educate yourself some more. But there are a lot of simple things that we can put in place to really help us and help the students. So don't be afraid to go Google things, chat to ChatGPT, look for videos on things, and see if there's certain things that you can start implementing in your own classroom. Okay, detour over. So we have to look at cultural, environmental backgrounds. Do your students come from a culture that values learning? Is there a very patriarchal culture? Is there a culture that encourages learners not to question the teacher? So understanding more of the cultures in your class will help you a lot to decode their approach to education. And then we have the zone of proximal development. So with this, if we look at it as a concentric circles, in the very middle, you have what you can do on your own. You don't need any help with. That's what you do. That's what you walk into the classroom being able to do. Then the circle around that is what can you do with guidance and help. And then out of that circle is what you can't do. The other thing that I like to do is to not look at it as a where are we? Not look at it as a circle, but as a as tiers. So let me just draw this for you. I am going to move over here. So this is what you can do. Then we have your zone of proximal development. So this is what you can do with help and guidance. So if we just left you on your own, now do I have a pointer here? If we left you on your own, you would be around here. You could get, the highest you could get to would be that. So that would be the highest you could get to on your own. Then, if you have incredibly skilled guidance, if you are incredibly motivated, if your mentor, your teacher, everything around you is the best it possibly can be, you would then get to the top of this. That is the zone of proximal development, by the way, this purple one. Now, what we aim to do is to get our students as close to the edge of the zone of proximal development as we can. So if we do everything right, if we really provide the best possible environment and the learners provide the best possible efforts, we can get to the top of the zone of proximal development. Realistically, that just is a very, very high bar and not one we are going to reach every single time. So what we want to do is to get as far into that zone of proximal development as we can. So this is the ZPD, zone of proximal development. And then, of course, at the top of that, what you can't do, or what you can't do yet. That's outside of your developmental zone at the moment. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about sociocultural theory of, oops, why are we doing this? Sociocultural theory or the zone of proximal development? All good? Oh dear. Am I still here? Okay, you can still hear me, still see my slides. Awesome. Okay, because my account is being very rude to me and interrupting me. Okay, so that is learner preference, sociocultural theory, and then hip hop pedagogy. So we have culturally responsive pedagogy or culturally relevant pedagogy. So that is the broader terminology. Now, culturally relevant would mean anything that is relevant to your learners' lives. So, culturally relevant pedagogy would be doing something for Heritage Day, getting learners to have a discussion or write a paragraph or do a oral on one element of their heritage, because that is something that is culturally relevant to them. Doing something on South Africa, that's culturally relevant. Anything that is relevant to any of the cultures that they belong to. Now, we all belong to various cultures. We have our ethnic and racial cultures. We have our national cultures. We have our generational cultures. If you do CrossFit, there's a whole culture of CrossFit. If you are a mom, there's a whole cult of motherhood. I say it as a mom. You know, there are so many cultures that we all belong to. So we're looking at a very broad view. Anything where we try and bring in content that our learners can connect with is bringing in culturally relevant pedagogy. Hip hop pedagogy is where we bring in anything that is relevant to pop culture. So, as someone mentioned, the 6'7" meme. Back many years ago when Childish Gambino came out with the This Is America song. I use that. Using TikToks as an introduction or as a text. I'm going to be honest, I'm very out of touch with teenagers these days. But anything that they connect with that is part of pop culture today, that is hip hop pedagogy. So, we had the discussion earlier with that very good question of how do you not come across as incredibly lame, is by accepting this is not necessarily your culture. Not to say we don't have pop culture, but we aren't teenagers and we don't need to try to be, but we can take an interest in their lives and we can get them to engage with what interests them. Because the more connected they feel to something, the more able they are to engage with it. And then, of course, exactly as we see in our assignment, there is literal hip hop pedagogy. So that is where you take Snoop Dogg's songs, for example. So examples of hip hop is Kendrick Lamar's tweets in a maths lesson. So some of the things we do need to be aware of is you do need to use your discretion, because the thing is, you look at something and you go, well, teenagers are going to be okay with this because what they're looking at and what they're watching and what they're listening to is way worse than this. But you do always have to aim at the most conservative child in your class. And there's always going to be a conservative child. As English teachers, we are going to be introducing material that is often a little bit uncomfortable, and that's absolutely fine. But you do want to be very careful that you don't choose anything offensive when you are bringing something in, that you can defend anything that you use. And any reasonable person would say, yeah, no, that is fine for a school classroom discussion. And of course, you do need to be aware of what's going on. That's one of the things about being a teacher that either ages you a lot or keeps you young, is trying to be aware of what's going on in teenagers' lives nowadays. Obviously, teenagers' lives are always going to be very mysterious and murky and weird, and adults will never actually know what's going on. But being aware of the big trends also shows an interest in their lives, and they do appreciate that. And that's an example of using hip hop pedagogy and maths. I think the assignments are all very clear, but any discussion in your assignment must be about English and applicable to an English lesson. That's just an FYI. I'm sure none of you would do that, but I have in the past had some answers where students discuss like maths lessons and things like that. Okay, so that is hip hop pedagogy, socially cultural, sociocultural learning theory, learner preference. Are there any questions on that? Yes, fantastic. That is such a good point. And Kendrick Lamar having won a Pulitzer Prize. And Dylan Thomas, also one I want to say, but a lot of even almost especially hip hop songs are in fact very, very artistic. There's a lot that goes on in pop culture that is incredibly has incredible literary worth. We do tend to sort of go, well, if it's mainstream or if it's pop culture, if it's easily accessible to people, does it really have literary merit? And this is an argument I have a lot about Harry Potter, because so many people are very quick to dismiss Harry Potter and go, well, how can you actually study Harry Potter at a tertiary level? And I point out, just because it's easily accessible doesn't mean it doesn't have incredible literary value. So that is something really worthwhile to consider. Okay, for the assignment, must the song be from a South African artist? Let me just double check. I'm pretty sure. No, a song from any of the major genres. So as long as the song, so you need to find the four major genres in South Africa, and then any song within one of those genres, whether it's South African or not. Okay, and then just very quickly, I just want to touch on the phases of a lesson. So the introductory phase, this is a very underrated part of the lesson. It is really, really important, but we often sort of overlook it. Now, if you get this right, you set up your whole lesson for success. If you don't get this right, oof, you're in for a long lesson. So there are certain things that this part has to do. It sets up the whole lesson. So the greeting is actually really, really important, because that is a starting point. It's a definitive starting point where you go, okay, and it shifts their mindset to this is the lesson. Because when they come in, there's lots of stuff going on, chatting, talking, you're talking to someone or you're busy with something, and you don't want to miss that formal, okay, stop everything. I greet you, you greet me. So you don't just want to say, morning, everyone, sit down, get your books out while you carry on chatting, and they carry on, and you go, okay, has everyone got their books open, right? And you start writing on the board. Very, very difficult to grab their attention, because they haven't shifted from that sort of settling, chatting outside of the classroom mindset to formal lessons starting. So you really want them to have that formal start. When we talk about the arrangement, this is setting out what they're going to need. So sometimes you don't want them to take out their books, and that's perfectly fine. But for a lot of lessons, you want them to have all the books they're going to use, all of the materials they're going to need, because every time you have to stop to get them to get something, they lose focus a lot. If it's on their desk, they don't have to shuffle in bags, they don't have to get up, they don't have to wander around. It's a lot easier. If you are continuing from a previous section or previous lesson, you really want to do a little recap just to get them back in the mind. And you do want to let them know what exactly is it that you are hoping they will know what to do by the end of the lesson? So this will help alleviate a lot of that. But why are we doing this? Why do we have to read Shakespeare? It also lets them know, okay, I actually am understanding, I'm on the right track, or, oh, no, I actually am genuinely lost. Because you don't want them to sort of feel like, I think I know what's going on, but I don't really know if what I know is what she wants me to know or what he wants me to know. So letting them know what it is that they should be focusing on getting out of the lesson will help them focus during the lesson. And it will also help them to see if they're lost or not. Because a lot of the time they'll go into a test and go, I thought I knew it, but then in the test I had no idea what was going on. So you want to sort of eliminate that. Now, what does an introduction actually need to accomplish? Well, it needs to grab their attention. If they are bored within the first 3 minutes, they are going to be bored the entire lesson. It doesn't matter what comes afterwards. It's very, very difficult to grab their attention once you've lost it. If you can get them interested in the material, you are more likely to keep that attention for the entire lesson. So you really want to do something that's going to get them excited for the lesson. The trick comes in that you need to make sure whatever it is that you do is actually relevant to your lesson. So you don't want to do something exciting just for the sake of it's exciting, but it's got nothing really to do with the lesson, because then it's actually kind of useless. So you have to decide, what is my lesson about? What are my learning objectives? And then work back from that to, what can I do with this that would be exciting for them? So you want to get their attention. You want to activate their prior knowledge. So with that, whether it's building on from a previous lesson, or whether it's just getting them to think about what they learned the previous year. So if it's poetry, reminding them and getting them to think about what figures of speech do they know, what do they know about structure, form, whatever it is that you're going to be focusing on, trying to get them to think about what they already know. And then you need to really show them and build a framework for what they're going to be doing in the lesson. So they need to be prepared for what's going to be coming in the next half an hour, 40 minutes. So has to be interesting, has to be relevant, has to engage prior knowledge, and it has to also set them up for the lesson to come. So I do see those questions. I am going to answer them in a second. Teaching and learning phase. This is the meat of the lesson. So this is where you do some talking, you get them to do some activities. So you present some information and then you get them to work with that information. This is where you are really getting to those learning objectives. And then the closure phase. So this is where you want to highlight the most important things you want them to remember. Because we all know in communication, we remember the first thing someone says and the last thing they say. That's what we remember best. So in the closure phase, you want to highlight what were the most important things. This is also a time to get them to check their understanding. It's a time where you can bring in real life examples, you can bring in a summary. It's also really important to have a closure phase because it brings that lesson to an official end. And that's really important for the way our minds sort information. If we go, okay, that's what we learned. Now I got it. Then when they come in for the next lesson and you've got an introduction for them, they're not sort of sitting there going, yeah, we did stuff. I can't quite remember exactly what we did. It just is a very helpful way for your students to organize the information. Now, just as a pro-life tip, when you do your teaching pracs, you are going to find that you're going to have these beautiful lessons, these beautiful plans, and the timing is going to never be correct. If you manage to get that timing correct, it is either the most incredible coincidence or you are a witch or wizard, because it is impossible to get timing 100% correct. So what you do have to do is you have to have a watch or a clock in the classroom that you can see very easily. If you've got a smartwatch, you can set one of those little alarms on it and it'll just buzz on your wrist. So 5 or 10 minutes before the end of the class, you stop the teaching and learning phase. Even if you haven't gone through it all or they definitely haven't finished, you stop them, you let them know that you will be continuing in the next lesson and you do a closure phase. In case you overestimate time, make sure that you've got some sort of activity that you can hand out or get the learners who have finished to start working on another activity. Try not to make it seem too much like, oh, this is, oh, you can work on that. Try and make it seem like it is on purpose, but have that extra activity to take up time. But if you are running over time, stop the lesson and do a closure phase. And whether you are doing a lesson for assessment or whether it's just your general teaching, it's always a good idea to have just a few minutes at the end to just round everything up. Okay, so I'm going to answer these questions, and please let me know if you have any other questions as well. Do we have to attach the entire lyrics of the specific song or just a part of it? So for 3.3, sorry, include a correctly referenced copy of the poem in your submission. So you must include the whole song. Okay. And it must be referenced. And then, are there word count limit guides for the assignment, or should we just attempt to answer the questions fully? So unless it's specified, you can answer fully. Please try to keep it relevant, so don't waffle, but you can answer fully. There are a couple of questions where you are given a maximum. So for question 3.4, it's 2 pages, double-sided. You can't go over that. And then for is a question 1.2 in no more than 6 sentences. So if it's not specified, you just answer until the question is answered without going overboard and waffling. And then if it says a paragraph is around half a page generally, should not be more than 3/4 of a page, shouldn't be less than 5 lines. That's really not enough. But around half a page is generally a good guideline for paragraphs. And Jacqueline, you've got your hand
Yeah,
up.
just on the including the whole song, do we have to include the song on the handout as well? Because then that will take up the 2 pages that we need to give the children in our lesson. So we can include it on our question in our sort of assignment, but then on the worksheet that we have to hand out, we won't be able to include the whole song because some of these songs are quite long. So I thought we could include the whole song in the assignment, and then on the handout just include maybe the verse and the chorus that we're going to be asking questions on.
So it does say a copy
In
of
the
the song
rubric.
you have selected.
Yeah, in the rubric it says it needs to be on there and it needs to be within 2 pages, which leaves you very little in space for the other activities that you need to include on that worksheet.
So this is a part of the challenge of this question is if you have already chosen a song, you definitely don't want to go back and rework it, but you want to think very carefully about how you are going to present that on the page. So yes, it is 4 pages because it's 2 double-sided pages. So you do have 4 pages to play with. You know, it has to be easy to read. You have to be able to annotate it. Is there some way you can play with the presentation? Is there some way to use space really effectively? If you haven't chosen a song, you would probably want to think about that. Without seeing the songs, there's only so much guidance I can give you there, but you would need to use the whole song, because if you don't, then you are opening yourself up to being majorly penalized for not actually including the song.
Okay,
That
thank
makes
you.
sense. I
Thank you so
don't
much.
want you guys to lose marks for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, I can see I have gone over time. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Thank you for your patience. I know this has been quite a lot of me talking, but I felt it was quite important to really highlight all these points. I am going to be hanging around for another 5 minutes or so. So if you think of a question, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, email me. If I haven't responded, please email me again. Otherwise, thank you all so much. I hope you have a lovely evening and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thanks, everyone.